we are recording. So, like I said, tonight we are going to be looking at the common rule, continuing our discussion. And so we are looking at the habits 2 and 3 tonight. So we looked at habits 1 and 2 last week, if you'll remember. And so the habits that we looked at last week were, pausing to kneel and to pray 3 times a day, or you might have adjusted that for you. It might have been 2 times a day. It might have been 4 times a day. The times that he suggests in the book are sort of morning, midday, and then bedtime. I think it's helpful to add in an evening one, sort of the end of the workday when you're transitioning from work to home, and really just praying for your evening time. And so my goal was the 4 times a day to really pause, morning, lunch, evening, and then bedtime. And then the other habit that we were looking at was scripture before phone. So in the mornings, before we sort of dive in, and whether that's on our phone or on our email or whatever, before we sort of dive into our work, letting scripture speak into our minds and our hearts first thing in the morning, to sort of reset our awareness of what's going on first thing in the morning. And so I'm just wondering, we're actually going to spend all of next week talking about our experience with these habits, and actually talking about some of the ways that we can develop habits. So really these first 2 weeks, we're looking at what the habits that we want to develop are, and we're sort of trying them out. And then next week, we're going to look at kind of what went well, what didn't go well, but also talking about what are some strategies that we can actually employ for developing habits. Because I don't just because you decide you want to do something, obviously you don't do it. It's not that easy. And so next week, we're going to be talking more on the practical side of what are some strategies that we can do. But I'd love to spend at least just a couple of minutes tonight hearing about your first week with these first 2 habits. How did it go? Anybody want to jump in there? Not all at once.
It went pretty well.
All right. Yeah.
It was definitely helpful having a plan and having, kind of knowing you were doing it, everybody was doing it together. I think too often I'm frustrated with my own bad habits, but it all stays inside my head and I don't come up with a plan and I don't kind of share it with somebody. So that's been helpful. So it's been nice. Just getting up and reading my Bible first, and the kneeling was helpful too.
Yeah. Okay. So a good experience there. Anybody else want to jump in, good or bad?
I found success with the reading the Bible first and not looking at my phone. That was really encouraging. I've done that before, but it's just hard to keep it up for some reason. But being furloughed helps because I don't have any pressing emails, and so that's been helpful. The kneeling prayer, man, that hurts to get on my knees. I didn't realize that. Like, it hurts. So I did that.
Hurt your pride.
What's that?
Did it hurt your pride or your knees?
It hurts my knees. There's nobody around. I don't have a whole lot of pride at 5 in the morning. So I'm kind of trying to figure out a new posture, what that would look like. And I thought about standing up. And so, I need to work on that. But it's been encouraging.
Yeah. I would say I had a similar experience in the sense that the scripture before phone was more familiar to me and much easier. I wasn't always doing it. That was a lot easier for me than the kneeling prayer was. The morning kneeling prayer, that's morning routines are easy because you are easier because you get out of bed and you do them. I struggled quite more than I expected with the noon and the evening prayer. The noon was the hardest, actually. I pretty much, it would be sometimes 2, 3, 4 o'clock. It would almost be the end of the workday before I remembered sometimes to do the lunchtime prayer. And so not only did I not bat 1,000 for the week. I didn't bat 1,000 on any single day. I never hit all 4, so that was a little discouraging, but not entirely unexpected. That's kind of my track record. Like I said, morning habits, morning routines are easier for me because you're just sort of getting up. And in my house, I'm the only one awake at that point. And so you really don't have there's nothing pressing on you at that point. You can kind of just do your morning routine. But I often, my days, I mean, I'm sure just like all of you, often get, even under quarantine, my days often get derailed, by a request or something I wasn't anticipating. And so anyway, that was my experience. And the morning routines were good. The rest I'm still working on. So anyone else want to add to that, or?
I would say that I think if I'm going to be successful in the afternoon, like the noon and evening ones, I'm going to have to set an alarm for me to remember, because I really don't think I'm going to remember to do it. Although I quite often do pray throughout the day. I mean, like, it is part of my habit when I think of something that concerns me to just pray about it right then. But it's not this kind of prayer that is consistent. And I've never really, I don't keep my phone next to my bed. I keep it in the kitchen when I charge it at night. So it's not a temptation to look at it first thing, but I realize that it takes a little effort not to look at it when I first walk past it. Which, before I'm really ready to, start engaging that. And so I had to kind of I'd start putting my finger towards my phone, and then I'd, remember and back off. But I did have a question for you, Philip, about these prayers that he's suggesting that people do 3 times a day or 4 times a day. How do you see those in relation to maybe more of an intercession time? That's not the only praying you're doing, is it? I mean,
no, I think that's a great question. And just before I answer that, Daniel, as the host, could you send an invitation to Rodney? I just got a text from him that he got banned or something.
Oh, I must have hit the wrong button. I thought I'll let him in. Yes, I will.
Yes, well, you somehow, I don't know how you do that, but will you send the invitation to him so that he can get into the meeting? So I don't know what happened there, but yeah, I think that's a great question, David, because I do see those as very distinct. Intercessory prayer, is a different thing. That I would, again, that's a different habit for me, where I'm trying to pray for people, particularly my family, and then the church, and then there's the rings, the concentric circles that you always hear about. It starts with your own family and kids, and then it's the church, and extended family and other churches going on, in the presbytery, and then just sort of the church generally. Some of us pray for the persecuted church. There's different, you can kind of build your list any number of ways, and there are actually some really good resources out there on sort of approaches to that intercessory prayer. This I see as different, at least for me, in the sense that these are more orienting prayers. I'm not in these moments bringing any particular and give me strength for what he's given me to do today. And so much shorter prayers and more focused in that sense. Does that make sense? Or
yes.
Yeah, and along those, love the link that Sam shared with us, the prayers from Calvin.
Yeah, you're breaking up a lot, Philip. We're not hearing you.
Oh, I told my kids to get off gaming, but I bet they're back on. So, I'm gonna try to see here if I can fix it. So, am I still breaking up?
You're okay at the moment.
If you discipline your kids, remember you're being recorded.
Okay. Well, I may need to hear. I am being recorded. Yep. So.
And also, I don't think I can let Rodney back in. I just copied and pasted how to do it as the administrator. I think you're going to have to do it. I'm sorry.
All right. So I need to send him the link. The joys of Zoom. So yes. All right. So let me
Account management, account settings.
yeah, I don't even know how to do that. So let's see.
I don't think I can do it. I didn't see it.
Job.
Seriously.
Daniel, did you try to send him an invite and it didn't work?
I sent him one, yeah, but it says that once you kick somebody out, they can't come back with the same email.
Oh.
I found how to basically allow him back in.
Doesn't Rodney have a bunch of burner email accounts?
No, those are phones.
All right. Well, I don't know how.
Shoot, man, I'm sorry. I'll send it to another email address. I'll get in contact with them. I'll figure it out.
All right. Well, so I'm sorry. I mean, hopefully you can do something there, but I can't figure it out.
Rodney, are you here? Oh, that's Tanya.
All right, maybe he's logging in as Tanya. That would be nice. So.
Maybe. Okay.
I'll leave. Account, so.
No, this is me trying to listen in. I'm trying to forward him the email so that he can log on through mine or something like that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I goofed it up. Okay, I'll put you back on mute. I'm sorry.
I don't know. Unfortunately, we come out. So.
I'll just give him the computer if we
All
can.
right. So while we try to figure that out, let me keep chatting here. Again, the one of the things that we talked about last week. That that set prayers for these times can be helpful. And Calvin, Sam actually shared a couple of links last week from prayers from Calvin. And if you just Google it, you'll find them. They're on the Gospel Coalition website, I think. They have sort of updated translations of Calvin's daily prayers for the morning. Makes that prayers for students, prayers for other times a day. That can be, if you're wondering, well, how do I do this? I mean, it's a short prayer. It's a brief prayer where you are, again, naming God. Remember, it's you're praising him for who he is, and then bringing your petition for the day to the front. And so I'm going to encourage you to to keep doing that. But I do want to press one. You see habit number 2, meal with others. Habit number 3, hour with phone off. And you remember the reason we're taking them in this order is because the prayers last week focused on our love for God, cultivating our love for God, and there was a resist prayer and an embracing prayer habit. I mean, and so now we're doing the same thing where there is again an embracing habit and the focus is on love for neighbor. And so, having a meal with others is an embracing habit that will cultivate your love for neighbor while
you keep freezing up and skipping around, Philip.
It's supposed to be a resisting habit that will allow you to have your phone off. And I'm getting another indication that my connection is unstable. So I'm actually going to move here to a different location. But the question I want to throw out there to you for discussion as I'm moving is this. So do you regard food as mere fuel for your body, or do you see it as something sort of central, more central to your being as a human, as a human being?
Good question. Who's going to answer?
It's a highlight of my day.
Is it?
The highlight of your day, is that what you said?
I don't know. I look forward to meals.
All right. Anyone else?
We treat food kind of as like an adventure. When we go to new cities and towns, we like to go find like really good food to get to kind of understand the area a little bit. So we love it in the Daft House.
Yeah, he talked about someone. Yeah, he talked about someone who would, prefer to take a pill instead of eating. Like, I can't even imagine that. I like food way too much to to do that. So
I think it's also presents us with a good forum for talking and digesting the day as well as digesting our food. My wife is an excellent cook. And
yeah, that's an interesting comment there, Larry. And that's actually the point that he's getting at. Food is actually sort of central to relationship in a lot of ways.
especially at the marriage supper of the Lamb. We look forward to it.
All right. So tell me what you're seeing.
Philip Kane's in an orange shirt. Background, some ivy, a couple photographs, a shelf.
Am I? Sorry for the technical difficulties here. Can you hear me better now?
If we didn't have technical
You are
difficulties,
all
we might
frozen
not
for
have
me.
any at
So
all.
I don't know if I'm far. I don't know if I'm worse off or if I'm.
We can hear you right now.
You're not any worse off.
I can't hear any.
I guess you are.
I can hear that bird very clearly. Can you get to where the bird is? Rocky?
So
That's Larry.
I think he's frozen now, but oh, there he goes. Moved.
My favorite part of Zoom is trying to guess if they can sit really still or if they're actually frozen.
Or sleeping with their eyes open.
yeah, this is. Well, I will tell you that I barely hear any of you at the moment. Daniel's frozen, Larry's frozen, David and Joe are black. So anyway, I apologize. I don't know if I'm talking to you or not.
I hear you.
A little slightly better location for. Okay, well, I'm going to keep talking and pretend that you can hear. Okay, yeah, I have a couple of chats saying that you can hear it. That's good. So, like I said, I can't hear you, but yeah, I found this idea that I would take a pill instead of eating kind of crazy, but mostly that's because I really like food. But the idea that Justin is getting at in the book is actually what Larry said. That not only is food an opportunity to really enjoy something, but it creates a rhythm in our day that is fundamentally relational. One of the things that we hear. Let's see here. One of the things that we hear in this idea that we don't want to waste time eating is that we don't really like being creatures. The desire not to eat actually goes against the grain of our created nature. God created us to need food as sort of a picture and microcosm of our overall dependence. And even sitting out here right next to the router, I'm getting indications that my internet is unstable, so I apologize for that. But our normal approach to food, when we just try to, get in and get it done with and see it as an inconvenience, is against that nature. That food reveals, as he says, it reveals our dependence upon God. It reveals our dependence upon, and it reveals our dependence upon creation. It reveals our dependence upon God because, obviously we need Him to to provide, and as Jesus says in parable, the farmer can plant and he can water, but it's God who gives the growth. Ultimately, our daily bread comes from the Lord. It's why it's one of the fundamental petitions of the Lord's Prayer. There's also just the dependence on each other, because you'll remember, Luther said that, we get our daily bread from God, but it comes through the farmer, miller, and the baker. That's the avenue that God utilizes to get it to us. And so, yes, God provides us with our daily bread, but he provides it with us through our fellow human beings. And I saw a documentary one time where they were talking about just the hours it would take, just to build the furniture in your house or something like that. And he said the man hours that it would take if you had to build and make everything from scratch that you use in your house in your daily routine would be overwhelming. It'd be more hours than you could possibly work in a week. And so living in community allows us to take dominion. That's why we were created to be in a relationship from the very beginning. And then, of course, we are dependent upon creation itself. We have bodies and we require physical sustenance. And so all of this reveals something about our nature. And so why would God put sort of dependence highlighting thing at the center of our days, at the center of our rhythms? That's something we can't go without. And Justin draws the conclusion. He says maybe we need this rhythm, and so we should honor that rhythm. We should honor our created nature by making the table central, by actually organizing our schedules around the table rather than trying to fit the table into our schedules that have been shaped by something else. The central, and it reminds us of our relationship with God, of our relationship with others, and even our relationship with creation. And so I'm going to ask is, what might this look like? What might it look like to organize our lives this way in our own homes? Anybody who can hear me want to jump in here? Everyone on my screen is still frozen, so maybe no one's listening to me.
I heard the end of the question. Can you reframe the question?
Yeah, okay. So Justin talks about the idea that we are to, he said honoring our created nature would suggest that we ought to make the table a center of gravity in our lives, rather than just trying to fit meals in around a schedule that is determined by something else. What would it look like for us to honor the dependence that is highlighted by our need for food, and the way that brings us into relationship with God, with others, and with creation itself? What would it look like for us to honor that in our daily routines?
Would it look like eating a banana during a Bible study?
Probably.
I'm totally nailing that one.
Yes. So you're eating over food. That's right. So, anyone else? Well, if you haven't guessed, this is actually what the chapter is all about. One way to do this, at least his suggestion of one way to do this, is making sure that at least one meal a day is a shared meal. It's a meal where you are sitting down, you're not rushing, but it's a meal that is as much about relationship as it is about fueling your body. And meals naturally have that power, in a sense, that they bring us together and they allow us to share conversation. And so he's suggesting that we eat one meal a day with others. Now, I wonder for us, for how many of you, that's like well, of course I've been doing that my whole life. Did anybody have that response to this idea of eating one meal with others?
Yeah, but once you say not rushed, then that takes out most of the meals that I eat with others during the school year, at least when school is actually in session and kids have to be somewhere.
Yeah, so sometimes maybe we're doing this, but we're. I was talking to Wally earlier. Maybe hopefully he doesn't mind me quoting him, but he said, yeah, sometimes we're doing this in the letter of the law, but maybe we're so distracted even we're sitting at the table together, but we're not really engaging with one another. So yeah, I think we've all had that experience, but I think in our circles, eating together is more common than it is in the culture at large. It was, I mean, I grew up in a household where, it's probably not an exaggeration to say, all of us sat down around the kitchen table for dinner, 350 times a year. I mean, there were very few exceptions. Obviously lunch was different because everybody was out. Breakfast was different because everybody was rushing, but even then, we were all kind of in and out of the kitchen. But dinner was just something we did together all the time. And that's been a tradition in my family as well. But just because you're used to doing something doesn't mean there's not benefit in thinking about it and maybe approaching it more intentionally. Because maybe if you haven't been intentional about it, you might have failed to see some of the benefits of it, and really saying, okay, this is a time to not be on your phones. We'll come back to that on the next habit. But this is a time for us to really engage. And Sarah was always good at asking what can seem kind of like corny questions, but are still good questions. Hey, what was a good thing today? What something made you happy? What was something that made you sad? What was something that got you excited? Those types of questions. And the kids would always roll their eyes. They would groan a little bit when we would ask these sort of pre-made questions or whatever, but yet it still led to conversation. They would roll their eyes, but then they would talk about something, and then you could follow up, and it would really be a chance for us to talk and see what's going on, see what the kids are excited about. And so having a meal with others really is a way for us to engage in relationship. And I love some of the quotes he has here. So look at some of these quotes if you can see them. He says, generations of Christians have described the household as a school of love. The household is where we're first introduced to what it means that the fundamental goal of life is to love each other, and the table is the centerpiece of that formation. The place where your kids learn to be in a relationship, and really the place where you learn to be in a relationship, the place where you learn that loving another person means setting aside your own interests and not pursuing selfish ambition. But the place where you first learn all that is in the home. Where you learn that, well, we're a family. And so, there has to be give and take. There has to be a setting aside of selfish desires. James talks about, why is there warring and quarreling among you? It's because of your selfish, you're serving your selfish desires. And that's in our parenting experience, that was probably the verse we quoted more than any other in the entire Bible. Why are you warring and quarreling? Well, because you're selfish, and you're fighting for your own way, and it doesn't work that way. And we really learn to love in the household first, and making the table the centerpiece of that is just a very helpful thing. Look at this second quote. He says, if our household routine is too busy to allow meals that unfold with family members, roommates, neighbors, we should at least admit that the school of our household is not a school of love, but rather a school of busyness. That household is a place where we teach each other how to do too much and be stressed about it. And he said, if you're not pausing to eat, together, with everything's just rushing from one thing to the next, then are you really a school of love? So anybody want to interact with that or engage with that quote at all?
Well, I agree with the points that he's making, and I just wanted to mention that, to me, in our experience, it's been a little bit of a season of life thing. That when our kids were still at home and in school, then we always had dinner, at a sort of regular time, and we all did it together. But after the kids were grown, then we pretty much, Kathy and I generally just eat in the living room, and but it's still a time when we fellowship with each other, but it's not like sitting necessarily at the table. So that's one thing. But the other aspect of it is that when we're not afraid about viruses, I have lunch with different people almost every single day. So, and regular
Yeah.
lunches with people that really add a tremendous amount to my life. So
Yeah.
it's,
Mhm.
you know, for me, it's not only the family time, but also with other people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and he actually is going to talk about that a little bit. But I kind of wish he did more with that. That it's not just. I mean, family is a great place to start. Having meals with your families, but those are obviously not the only people we want to have relationships with. And if you're at work and if you can get away, even if it's it might still be a little rushed because of rush hours and job requirements, but being able to sit down and eat, not work through lunch, but take a break, walk away from your desk, walk away from whatever projects you're working on, and really engage with people. Those are places where love is formed as well, where you're engaging in relationship. And so, yeah, I appreciate that point, David. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in there? Well, another quote that I found helpful is that he said, this is an incredibly difficult thing one evening on any one evening. It's sometimes a challenging thing, and you're not going to bite 1,000. You're not gonna you're not gonna do it every time. He says, but if it becomes your habit, it's incredibly rewarding over time. And that's, I was talking to someone today, I can't remember, but we were talking about these habits a little bit, and it's not that you're gonna do it perfectly right away from the very beginning, but as you establish routines and as you establish habits, these sort of automatic behaviors, they reap benefits slowly over time, and that's why it's worth sticking with it. If you've been injured, or if you've been on a layoff and you're trying to kind of get back into the routine of running or exercising, you got to start slow and you got to build up, and you're going to have some moments where you're gonna miss a run or you're gonna get off schedule. But if you stick with it over time, you will slowly begin to rebuild your stamina. You'll slowly begin to rebuild your strength, and you'll see progress over time. Not because you followed the routine perfectly, but because you're consistent enough. And that's really what we're after. We don't expect perfection from ourselves. We know ourselves too well. But pressing on in this really does help. And as you press on in this, you develop the habit of eating together. One of the things I appreciate about what he says is you really create something that's worth inviting others into. And so, maybe it's a family meal, but you can also get into the habit of inviting neighbors into it. And again, I think this is a good thing. Establishing the habit of a daily meal is just the beginning. We must learn to invite others in, whether it's others from the church family or others from the neighbors. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really encourages me about Trinity is how often I see people doing this. People eating together. Again, whether it's at lunches, whether it's after Sunday church and just inviting people over. There's always room for improvement, but this is something that I see people doing and I'm really encouraged by it. And I love what he says, that these types of invitations where we're sharing our table with people is really, it's at the root of edification and evangelism. It's how you speak love into your neighbor, into your church family's life, as you edify and build up the people you live with. Sharing a meal together is a great way to do that. Most of my pastoral work takes place over meals. I'm meeting with people, I'm talking to people over meals, and it's just a great way to speak into people's lives. But evangelism is the same way. There was the quote, and I don't remember who the quote was from, but he said, that the unbelief in our age is more a mood than a conclusion. It's not something that they've reached, by precise argument as much as it is just something they felt. And one of the steps towards belief is really coming to just be in relationship with a Christian. and coming to into a position where you can hear the reason for their hope. And Tim Keller talks about wanting the gospel to be true before you even believe it. And that happens in relationship with other believers, where like, I wish what you had was true. I would like to have that too. So thoughts there, or anybody want to interact with that? Well, here's my plan. And again, there's some of it's dependent on how things unfold with the pandemic, but again, daily meals with family, we're going to continue to prioritize that. That's something we're already doing. That's not going to be new for us. But it is something we are going to continue to do. And then again, continue to try to, meet weekly and sometimes more than a week with members of the church family. This is, again, not new. I do this a lot. But we're also talking about even doing it as families more. I do it more with individuals. And Sarah and I have been talking about possibly doing this more on the family level. Maybe it's a Sunday lunch. We do that sometimes, or maybe it's just during the week having somebody over, but doing more of that. And then for me, the one that will be more new is this last one here. Monthly meals with neighbors. The people who live around me who don't go to Trinity. That's something Sarah and I've talked about doing and have never really been very good at. And so that's, for me, that's sort of the ambitious side of here. Once the COVID thing allows it, really, trying to have our neighbors into our house for a meal, with no agenda, not a Bible study, just having them over to cook burgers on the grill and hang out. So,
hey,
so what's going to be your plan? Anybody have an idea? How do you plan to practice this habit?
Hey, I have just a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to see that on our screen right now? I still see meals with others eating as inconvenience.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been taking screenshots of everything and talking to Jessica about it.
You should see these different slides, but obviously you're not.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, it tells me that I'm sharing my screen. Does anybody else see it? It should say on your screen right now, how will you practice this habit? I see David shaking his head no.
No.
No. All right. Well, I apologize.
Why don't you try unsharing and then sharing again?
Yeah, let me stop the share and then share again. So.
Thank you, David. Good idea. There we go. Can you go back to the other one too?
Yeah, I can just send it to you later if you want to. I'll just send you the PowerPoint. How's that? So. If anybody else wants it, send me an email. I'll send out the PowerPoint. It's not that helpful, but it has a bunch of quotes on it. But yeah, anyway, so here's the one that, let's see here, the one I was on before. Here's what I'm planning to do. And then kind of looking at what are you planning to do? How will you practice this habit?
Jessica and I decided it's probably about 2 years ago now, whenever it was before COVID started, so that's been a while ago, but that we were going to try to start having people over again. And so we decided to figure out how to use our crock pot. And so we're doing that with church people, at least. We have neighbors over, well, when this isn't going on, maybe once every month or two, but we'll be restarting everything. No matter what your habits were, I think we're all going to have to figure out how to start them again.
Yeah. It is kind of a nice thing, where you get to start, and maybe some neighbors you've talked to. I was, one of the pastors in the Presbyterian I was talking to earlier this week, and he said that, he's lived in the same neighborhood for 23 years. He's been the pastor of this church for 23 years. And he has a neighbor who he's kind of been on waving terms with for those 23 years, but he's never really, he said, I talked to him more this week than in the previous 23 years combined, probably, just because people are home, they're stuck, they're lonely, and they happen to both be outside at the same time, and ended up talking for a couple hours. And, I've had some of the similar experiences. I've had conversations with neighbors that, I haven't talked to before, just people we happen to be out at the same time. They're walking their dog, I'm out, out walking or whatever. And so, yeah, it's opportunities to follow up once things kind of start to loosen up and we're allowed to do that again. But again, I just encourage you to think of your meals not as an interruption, but as an opportunity to love your family first, but love others as well, and just and think of meals as an opportunity for relationship. God gave us this sort of constant routine reminder of our dependence, and let's use it. Let's use the rhythms. I say it about other things. I've said, he gives us the morning and the evening. He gives us the week. He gives us the month. He gives us the year. These are rhythms that he himself has woven into the fabric of the universe, and we're wise to pay attention to them. And it's the same with the need for food. Don't see that as a necessary evil, an interruption to the more important things, but actually just an opportunity to pause and to share that time and to engage. It's a way to engage your neighbor. But the other habit I think is related to this, and hopefully you can see that. But it's habit number 3, and I know we're a little short on time here, but it's an hour with your phone off. And he starts off the chapter talking about his daily check-in with his wife, which that right there is worth something. Just that routine, the fact that he about 2:00 in the afternoon, they talk on the phone every day just to check in, how are things going. Now, part of that's the nature of his job. It's so uncertain. She doesn't know when he's coming home. They're trying to figure some of those things out. But he was talking about, we're doing this check-in, and at some point she asked me, "What do you think?" And I realized I have no idea what she's talking about, because I had mindlessly picked up my phone and started scrolling through emails or notifications or whatever. And he said, "I was with her. We were doing our daily check-in, which is a good thing, but I wasn't with her. I wasn't paying attention." I wonder how many of you have ever had an experience like that, and I wonder how many of those experiences were related to your phone or the notifications on your computer. Anybody want to share a story?
Yes, and thankfully my wife is good to call me out on it. It's always embarrassing and sometimes gets me a little worked up.
Yeah, I can remember my dad. This was before smartphones, but before I was married, but engaged. He said one of my pieces of advice for you is, when she talks, close the book. Don't try to keep reading and listen to her at the same time. It will not go well. I think that applies. That's the same basic idea that he's getting at here. With the phones. But really, the goal of all this, the goal of turning off your phone or closing the book, if it's not your phone, the putting down the newspaper, whatever illustration you want to use. He said the goal is presence. All right. We're not just doing it to do it. We're doing it so that we can be more fully present with those who we're with. And I love what he says. He says trying to be omnipresent or even multi-present is against our created nature. Trying to live without food, trying to make food necessary evil is against the way God created us. And whenever we resist nature, all vain attempts to be God rather than his creature, they break us. And he said the desire to be multiple places at once means we end up being nowhere. We're nowhere fully present, and then we miss out. When we're nowhere present, we miss out on the joy of being present with someone, and they miss out on the joy of being with us. And so when we embrace our reality of being able to be present only in one place, we find the deep joy of being present someplace. And then the second one's not a quote, but it's something he said. He's getting at this. He says, when we embrace the reality, not only does it lead to our joy, but it leads to others' joy, because they have the joy of having someone present with them. And human presence, human relationship is essential to life and to the enjoyment of life and just real true flourishing. And so one way that we cultivate that presence, he says, is by turning your phone off, and not just on silent, but actually turn it off where you are you're unreachable. He says, because being unreachable means that the only person who can reach you is the person you're with. And so, obviously there are times when we can't do that, when we need our phones, but there are moments in our days when we can just say, okay, listen, I'm with this person and I'm not even concerned. but that makes us, there's a certain dread or anxiety, or I learned a new word on NPR last year, FOMO. I was like, what are they talking about? What is this FOMO? Maybe you haven't heard that before, but it's the fear of missing out. And it's a major thing today amongst young people, but I don't think it's limited to them. I think us older ones can suffer from it as well. It's like, well, what am I missing out on? Who might be trying to get a hold of me? That I'm not aware of. And so there's this idea of just turning our phone off for a little while. And he really talks about 3 places where we can do this. One's at home. Maybe it's when you get home, you just set your phone aside and you just don't touch it. You don't look at it. It's turned off until after dinner. Maybe you need to do a little bit of work after dinner, but your phone is off until after dinner. Maybe it's after dinner until bedtime. When you get home, you got to still do a few things. You're still kind of going, but when it comes to dinner and your family's sitting down to eat, you're done until bedtime. Maybe you do one last call for work at the very end of the day or whatever. Maybe it's during the family meal. Just turning the Wi-Fi off at your house or turning your phone off. I think those are helpful suggestions. There's not one right way to do this, but he is suggesting find a time where your phone is away and you're just present with your family. All right. That's one. Anybody want to jump in there on that or comment on that?
One thing that I thought was helpful that he mentioned was that he had his phone set when he turned it off like that, so that if somebody called twice, it would let it through. So people that knew him, if they really had an emergency, like something was really very serious, then they could get through. But if it wasn't an emergency, they wouldn't.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I know iPhones do that automatically when you turn off notifications or whatever. It will, if you turn on Do Not Disturb. If someone calls twice in 3 minutes, it'll get through. I don't know if other phones do that automatically. I will tell you, because we don't have a landline, and I never have my phone where someone can't call me. But I often will use Do Not Disturb where I don't get any other notifications. I don't see emails. I don't see texts. I don't, and I do think that's, it's not quite as effective as what he's talking about, but you may, that may be a starting point if you're not ready to go all out and off, and he mentioned, I said, I never turn it off when I'm away from my wife, he said, that's not something I'm going to do, but yeah, I think just having it away, where you're not getting notifications, but maybe it's still acting as a phone, because phones really are, at least in our day and age, used much more for emergencies. If someone calls, it's usually something particular where, usually it's text, and at least in my life, it's text and emails are the much more sort of immediate types of things that people do. So anyone else want to jump in there?
I think just being aware of how much time you're spending on the phone is probably as important as whether you have it turned off for a set amount of time.
Yeah.
We talked about it yesterday that my job's sort of tied to my phone and I'm sort of on call all the time in a way. So, but I can still designate times, like, for example, during mealtime, to be more proactive about putting the phone away and not having it near me.
Yeah, and for me, it's like when I leave work and get home, until sort of, I mean, in my present stage of life, my bedtime is before my kids. That didn't used to be the case, but that's a time where I try not to do any work. And if I have to do work in the evening, I can do something late, but I try to make that window where I'm not checking emails, I'm not checking messages. If someone calls, I'll still answer. But not messing. Hey, Roger, I see you just appeared on my screen. Were you wanting to say something, or did you just appear for some reason?
I don't know. Am I back?
You're there, so I can see you, but I don't know why you appeared. So I thought maybe you wanted to say something.
Earlier, I was thinking a thing about family meals. So I'll wait until you're through with the phone thing here, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. Well. We're close to the end of our time, so let me hit this. He talks about turning your phone off at a period when you're at home. And again, you have to decide how you're going to do that, what works for you. There's not a right answer here. We're trying, but again, the goal is presence. Remember that. That's what this is about. It's about being present, and how do you minimize the distractions of your phone. I love this quote. I didn't read it earlier because I was going too fast, but he said, we have to acknowledge that our phones are carefully designed to attract, you could even say capture, that might make it a little bit stronger, to capture our attention and sell it to advertisers. You know, the same technology that they use in slot machines, they use in your phone, you know, to capture your attention and keep it for as long as possible. And so, you know, that's something we need to be aware of. Our phones aren't neutral. They are designed to capture our attention. And so we're trying to minimize that or actively work against that. And we do it at home. We can also do it at work. And I don't want to spend too much time here. There's a great book, not by a Christian, called Deep Work. A guy named Cal Newport, at least I thought it was a great book. You know, but basically turning off your notifications at work. One thing I've tried to do more is basically not use notifications at all, and just have set times when I check emails and messages. You know, and for me, you know, I try to work in like 55-minute bursts, basically. That's about when I'm getting tired and getting restless, and I even have a timer, not surprising to you guys, but, you know, and when that goes off, I kind of stand up. It's a time I'll check my email real quick. I'll check my messages, see what's coming in the last hour. But I'm trying not to do that throughout the week. And again, he says this too is a way of loving your neighbor. It actually allows you to do better work. If you're loving your neighbor by your work, you know, not being distracted at work, being present with your work is actually a way of loving your neighbor too. And then finally, he talks about doing this sort of in the pursuit of, with God in silence, you know, turning off your notifications to spend time in work, and sort of a retreat, whether that's weekly or monthly or quarterly, yearly, however. I will say this is not a part of my routine at all. I've done it once or twice. You know, when we were starting journey groups many years ago, we did a day of prayer. When I was in seminary, we did days of prayer once a semester. It's not something that's been part of my regular routine, and I don't really know what I'm going to do with it yet. But so as you can see there, I'm undecided. You know, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But I do want to continue what I do at work and be more consistent in turning my phone off for periods at home, to where we are really present with each other. You know, it's not uncommon for us to all be sitting in the den at our house, but we're all on our phones. You know, to instead of doing that, maybe be more present. You know, whether it's you know, playing a game or just talking. So, anybody else want to jump in there?
I was going to say, I get a kick out of being in restaurants, and I'll look around and see if I can spot this, and I'll see a man and his wife, or a lot of times it's a like high school couple or college age, and they'll sit down and they'll be kind of looking lovingly at each other, and then next thing you know, in a minute or two, they'll both be on their phone.
Yeah, it can happen for sure. Okay, I'm moving again because my wife needs her desk, which is what I was sitting at, to get on her call with the women.
Hey, did Roger say what he was going to say? I'm curious what he was going to say earlier.
Yeah, Roger, we'll give you the last word here. So,
okay. I was just going to say that family meals are also a time to teach sort of Christian etiquette to children, in terms of preferring somebody else to yourself, in terms of speech, handling food, etc. And that does spill over into the way they treat people, you know, at school, how they give preference to them and so forth. I've seen that. We always had a rule that nobody eats until everybody is served, as a way of giving deference to, particularly if it's my wife serving, you know, she's worked hard, you know, let's honor her and let her sit down. Well, I remember one time we used to have a lot of foreign students at our meals, and after a meal, my wife was serving dessert, and she served the guest first, and then she went back in to get other plates, and the fellow began to start eating his dessert. And so one of my kids said, "Hey, Mom, he's already started eating his dessert." You know, well, it was embarrassing to us and to him, you know, so it sort of backfired. but 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 the kids caught on to that. You know, the other guy should have preference. You know, in social
Yeah.
action. You know.
Yeah, the you know, not the movie that you would think of as teaching social lessons, but I think it was called Blast from the Past or something. But it was like some guy who during like the Cuban Missile Crisis or something had gone underground, and then he came back out, and you know they were kind of contrasting the etiquette of previous generation with current generation. And there was a line in that movie where the kid who had come out of the bomb shelter, you know, was getting made fun of for his manners. And the people were basically implying that, you know, manners are just hypocritical. It's just a way to try to manipulate people. And he's like, oh no, not at all. Manners are a way of showing love for somebody. They're a way of showing respect. And it was actually that was for me eye opening. Like I had never thought about manners that way. Like I always thought of manners as pretentious, you know, as a kid. Like you know, this is just some stupid social custom, and it's just all hypocritical, and it's all fake, and it's all pretense. And I don't remember how old I was when I saw that, but you know, late high school or college. I mean, I was older than I should have been when I realized this, that the manners were actually a way of loving somebody, you know, and that was eye opening to me at the time, from kind of a corny movie. So. I appreciate the point, Roger. Well, we are way over. Sorry for all the technical difficulties tonight. I don't know what's going on with the internet at my house. I told Wally earlier, I said, I need you to help me troubleshoot what's going on at my house because it's disastrous currently. But we will try to get maybe get it better before next week and see if we can fix some of these technical issues. But I appreciate you guys hanging in there. Appreciate the discussion, and I do encourage you to try these habits this week. And next week, we'll be actually talking about our experience with these 4 habits and how they went, and we'll be talking about some practical strategies for how we might continue to cultivate them in our lives. So until then, we'll see you guys around.